listening to the Betmaker Show. This is the College Football Conference USA Betting Odds Preview for Monday, August 5th, 2019. And now, live from Las Vegas, the host of the Betmaker Show, Brian Blessing.
All right, we're excited to talk college football. Always a treat when we get a chance to yap with our good pal Bruce Marshall from the Gold Sheet. And today we're going to focus on Conference USA. We're getting ever closer to football, Bruce. It's fun talking about it.
Yeah, we're here. We're in T-minus less than a month now, and that includes Conference USA. It's easy to forget these guys sometimes, but there's some good football played, and they fill up a lot of the ESPN Bowl week. It's a lot of these bowl teams from you usually get 6-7 USA teams in bowls. So we'll be talking about them all throughout the year.
Yeah, the one thing, you mentioned the bowls. As an overview, don't sleep on these guys at the end of the year. They kind of fly under the radar in bowl season. Last year, they went 4-2 in bowls, and you go back since 2011, 30-18 straight up in bowls, and making monies for the players, 28-19-1 against the spread. So actually good play on teams when you get to bowl season. Yeah,
and they're involved in all of these minor bowls, but there have been some pretty good programs here. I mean, La Tech has been pretty good throughout the years here, done some good things. When Jeff Brom was there, Western Kentucky was doing some business, so we'll talk about them a little bit more in a minute. It's been kind of down for them recently. But, yeah, I mean, there's the bottom of this league is usually pretty bad. That's what kind of distorts the perception of Conference USA. But the top teams are pretty competitive, and usually in those mid-level bowl games can hold their own, more than hold their own.
All right, to that end, let's start in the East. We'll go alphabetically. And Charlotte, as you said, one of the lower-rung teams, 40-1 to win the Conference USA title. They bring a new head coach in, Will Healy from Austin Peay. And this is a guy, at least with his pedigree, he knows how to get teams going out of the gate.
Yeah, and he had some success at the P, and he's coming in here, a program. I thought they might have a little rough to pull the plug on Brad Lambert like that after he got this thing up and running. That's never an easy thing to get a program established in that regard. Kind of reminds me of what Larry Coker had to go through at UTSA, which we'll talk about in a few minutes, a few years ago. But to sustain that push, they want more at Charlotte there, so they have big designs for the program, and we'll see if Healy can do something here. He's got a couple of pieces back, including on offense, Benny LeMay, pretty darn good running back, over 1,200 yards rushing last year. But the problems were really on the offensive end last year. They did not score many points. They were only barely 21 per game. That was 114th nationally. So they've got to upgrade the offense some. The defense not all that bad, but it's got to start. You got to score some points, especially in this league, and they've got to figure out how to get this offense going in Charlotte.
Florida Atlantic 3-1 to win the title when it's all said and done. But all of a sudden last year, they just fell off the map with Lane Kiffin, only 5 wins. They lose their workhorse Singletary, the running back, to the NFL. Robeson's the quarterback. We'll see if Lippin can get him to bounce back. One thing I would just say, Bruce, buyer beware when Kiffin is a favorite. Last year, they were 1-6 against the spread when they were laying the wood.
See, this is the danger year to year when you look at a side, because a lot of handicappers, me included last year, were still kind of riding FAU from the previous year when Kiffin was covering every single game, it seemed like. But last year, like you mentioned, no dice, and especially as a favorite, it didn't work out for the Owls last year. So that was a problem. Now, in the offseason, they thought momentarily they might have DeAndre Francois, the ex-Florida State quarterback, enrolling, but he did not get into school then, and so he will not be there. And Robinson's had some off-field issues too. So and they lose Singletary last year. It was such a force rushing. So this is sort of an interesting situation because Kiffin so overshot expectations in year one and then undershot last year. And, we talked about Charlotte a second ago. Kiffin beat Charlotte the last game. He gets bowl eligible last year. He couldn't even do that. So, I mean, we'll see about Kiffin this year, if he's going to look more like 2 years ago or last year. There's some questions about him being able to stabilize his program in Boca Raton.
Florida International, you get a named coach in Butch Davis, and he has one of the easiest schedules in college football. They got work to do. The schedule might help a little bit. He's got a solid recruiting class, and maybe it was bad experience, but it was a team that got some experience last year.
Yeah, I mean, they were sort of a revelation. I mean, they ended up 8-4 regular season, 9-4, won the bowl game over Toledo. And this year the schedule, like you said, breaks pretty good. Now it won't be an easy opener at Tulane, but if they can win that one, and then they get La Tech late in September, I mean, there's a path for these guys not only to win the East, but certainly to hit mid-November at 9-0. Then it gets kind of tough with Kiffin, who beat Butch last year pretty bad, and then they actually play a game against the Hurricanes. They get to host this year. I wonder how they pulled that off with local Miami, and then they go to Marshall the last game of the regular season. But Butch Davis, look at his track record wherever he's been. He's won. He's the only coach still to get the new incarnation of the Cleveland Browns into the playoffs. But his job at Miami earlier, North Carolina, he won. He's propped this program up. James Morgan, the transfer from Bowling Green at quarterback, put up some very good numbers, and most all their top running backs and receivers are there from last year. If the defense tightens a bit, I could see this team 9-0 into mid-November. This is a team I think might win the East.
A bet on Marshall's, a bet on Doc Holliday. They're 7-2 to win the conference. The one thing we know about them, they're good in bowls, and they're also a team that's on the improve late in the season.
Yeah, and they did kind of roar down the stretch last year, and they really roughed up South Florida in the bowl game. And Doc has really established this thing. You know, they had a little bit of a trouble a couple of years ago, and the quarterback sort of went crazy on them. But it's stabilized there. Isaiah Green stepped in last year at quarterback, turned into a pretty dynamic playmaker for them, and most of the people on this offense are back from the side that scored 38 in the bowl game against South Florida. They do have some experience they've got to replace on their lines, especially on the defensive side. But Doc has got this program punching, above its weight for many years, and he's 70-46 at Marshall, so that is pretty darn good. Another bowl bid awaits. Interesting group of 5 game in week 2 of Friday night at Boise State, which will be kind of interesting. They also get to host Cincinnati a few weeks later. They may lose a couple non-conference games, but I think it's Marshall or Butch Davis, Florida International on top in the East.
All right, Middle Tennessee State. Rick Stockstill lost a lot to graduation, including his quarterback and his son, Brent, who graduated. Might be a bit of a transition year here for the Blue Raiders.
Yeah, man, it seems like Stockstill's son was there for about 10 years at quarterback, and he finally graduates. But, Rick has kept this thing, Papa Rick has kept this program at that 6-7 win level, getting into minor bowls. They got routed by App State last year in the bowl game, but App State was pretty darn good. But Middle, you're right, you've got to replace the quarterback. O'Hara, the heir apparent, has taken a few snaps in the past, but not many. This team will it was a better defense at Middle last year than it had been in recent years. Scott Schaefer used to be the head coach at Syracuse, seems to have solidified things over there. Now they get a couple of Big Ten road tests in non-conference at Michigan and at Iowa before they get into conference play, so they could take some licks there. But I think given Stockstill's track record, even before his son was a quarterback, he was getting to minor bowls. So you could see another 6 or 7 win season out of these guys and back somewhere in the bowl mix.
Old Dominion started 1-6 last year. Bruce, could be more of the same for head coach Bobby Wilder. This offense has a lot of work to do.
Yeah, they really struggled some last year, they've dropped off after their bowl game a couple of years ago for Coach Wilder, who did shake up the staff there. He wanted to get some things going, and they did score a little better than 30 points per game last year, but most everybody is gone from last year as they've got 9 starters to replace on the offensive end. So this is going to be an issue here, how they're going to perk up the offense. I'm not sure. The defense has been soft for a couple of years. There's only a handful of returnees on that side too, and new coordinators as well. So this is a complete rebuild, it looks like, at Old Dominion this year. We'll see how long they stick with Wilder. I mean, he won here before they made the transition up to the FBS level, so he's got a little bit more rope than others. But tough non-conference slate there with Virginia Tech and Virginia back-to-back, though a week off between them. But they could get beaten up a little bit there in September. Remember, Virginia Tech is going to be revenge-minded in that game because Old Dominion pulled one of the upsets of last season in Norfolk over the Hokies. I don't think they're going to do that back-to-back when they go to Blacksburg September 7th.
Western Kentucky fell off the map last year with just the 3 wins. They bring the new head coach in, Tyson Helton. But the thing is, he's got a lot of experience here. He's an experienced offensive coordinator, and he was the guy during their record-setting 2015 year as the OC. They've got a running back, Joshua Samuel, who could be a real workhorse. It was a young team last year, Bruce. I could see this being a team that you might consider playing on a weekly basis. You know, obviously every game's a snowflake, but I think this could be a team that you consider an over team in terms of the way they'll play, pace of play in their games. Yeah,
you could. And Helton is, boy, I'll tell you what, he is a buzzsaw. This guy, he's he's Clay Helton's brother and son of Kim Helton, so coaching in his family. But he is not like Clay. Clay's very sort of introverted. This Tyson is very extroverted, and maybe that's what they needed at Western Kentucky. It really went pear-shaped for them the last 2 years with Mike Sanford in there as head coach. He turned out to be one of these coordinators who was not suited to be a head coach. The drop from the Jeff Brom years was significant, all the way down to 3-9 last year. So they really burned money. But like you mentioned, they do have some pieces back. Most everybody is back offensively, including Samuel, the running back. Duncan, the quarterback, played much down the stretch. Actually, they won a couple of games in November with him. So I could see this thing could perhaps turning around quickly, that it was more a function of Sanford being overmatched last year. And the schedule is not that daunting for them either. So Western Kentucky might be one of these teams we want to watch in the first month of the season for sure.
Betmaker, let's make some money tonight.
For outstanding information and special offerings and promotions, we invite you and encourage you to sign up for our newsletter today simply by going to the website at betmaker.com. Brian Blessing, Bruce Marshall, we're talking Conference USA. We head to the West. Louisiana Tech 7-1 to win the conference. Listen, Skip Holtz knows what he's doing. He's got his quarterback, Jamar Smith. And we talk about, you said burning money with Western Kentucky. I'll tell you where you can make money, and that is take the points with Louisiana Tech. Holtz is a great underdog coach.
Yep, and he has been good for years in that role, and La Tech usually punches above its weight and gets into a bowl game, and like last year, went to Honolulu and won that game over the Rainbow Warriors. So they've got some experience. They've got a track record. Like you say, Skip is pretty good as an underdog. He's got his quarterback returning for his senior season. Jamar Smith started for a couple of years, third season as the starter. The numbers weren't quite as good last year. As the offense sort of bogged down. They had some injuries in Smith, a little bit of inconsistency, but maybe the bowl game got them back on the right track there. They have some big shoes to replace on defense. Jalen Ferguson, defensive end, one of the top sackers in college history, is out, as is the rest of the defensive line. But they figure that they can replace those pieces pretty well. They like I mentioned, the quarterback returning and a couple of his top targets, including Hardy, who caught 75 passes last year. And I think La Tech is back in a bowl and will be in the mix in the West like it usually is. And this, like you said, look also at Skip when he's an underdog, like he will be in the opener at Texas on August 31st.
North Texas, the favorite to come out of the West. Head coach Seth Luttrell. He's got the quarterback, Mason Fine. The kid's a stud, and all the wide receivers are back. And, Bruce, you can't say this very often. I mean, this is a real anomaly. North Texas last year outgained every team they played. You can't even say that about Alabama.
You're right, although they did get the boat race in the bowl game, though, against Utah State. And at the end of the year, they were outgaining, but a lot of those are CUSA teams, but the schedule broke pretty well.
But they couldn't stop anybody.
They couldn't stop anybody.
They're an over team, man.
Yeah, they are. And the deal last year, these guys started off so hot, and by the end of September, or late September, it was pretty well accepted that Luttrell was going to get pulled out of there to a bigger job. There's Texas Tech-like offense spread. They ripped Arkansas, blew out Liberty, and then all of a sudden they started to flatten out after they started 4-0, and then they started to flatten out, and then they got crushed in the bowl game by Utah State. Graham Harrell, his offensive coordinator, one of those Texas Tech guys, ended up getting pulled out to USC. As Clay Helton mentioned him a moment ago, using Harrell as his new offensive coordinator. But Luttrell, after a lot of people thought he was going to get the Texas Tech job, let's see what he can do this year. This team did disappoint some down the stretch. But they do have the quarterback, like you mentioned, in Mason Fine, almost 4,000 yards, 27 TDs last year. He can put up some huge numbers in this offense. The defense, though, like you said, was struggling down the stretch last year. Schedule's still not too bad for them. North Texas will be in the mix, probably back to a bowl. They're wondering in Denton how long they're going to keep Luttrell. They thought they were going to lose him after last year, and I think this coach is on his way to bigger and brighter things in the future.
All right, we move on to Rice, and this is a little interesting team to me, Bruce. I mean, they're not going to set the world on fire, but they got tons of youth that got experience last year. But Mike Bloomgren's team was decimated by injuries. If they can stay healthy, they might be a team that can make you some money taking points.
Well, they might. But my problem with, because we've seen Rice do that in the past, but those were the Bailiff teams who often did pretty well. And there's a lot of people who are wondering about this hire of Bloomgren only because he's trying to install a Stanford-like style, and that's where he came from. He was on David Shaw's staff, so it's sort of a power run-based offense. Which, by the way, Stanford didn't do that well last year either. But whether you can pull that off at Rice, I'm not sure. The manpower is down there. Defensively, they're traditionally undersized. They did have injury issues last year, but the offense was not all that good. And I'm not sure Bloomgren's style, suggests that Rice is going to be able to play a power game. I mean, they open up. This is a pretty darn tough opening schedule. Army, Wake Forest, Texas at the Houston Texans Stadium, and Baylor. I mean, they could take a lot of lumps in September this year. So I think could be another long year for Coach Bloomgren at Rice.
Southern Miss is 8-1 to win Conference USA. Kids got some experience last year. The one thing, this defense has been really good. I mean, third best defense in the country last year. The problem is for Jay Hobson, the offense has been trending down. He's got to fix that offense.
Yeah, and they've got to perk it up a little bit. Now, they think their quarterback, Abraham, who ended up posting some decent numbers last year, might be the guy to do it. But that's pretty much the deal. You hit it nail on the head there. The defense has been fine. The offense a little bit struggling last year. They were one of these teams. Last year that they had a game postponed early, and they were actually bowl eligible, but didn't get a bowl bid. There was a thought in the offseason that they were going to bring Art Briles in here as the offensive coordinator. That didn't happen. But let's see how they can handle this September part of the schedule at Mississippi State, at Troy, and at Alabama, 3 in a row. If they aren't too bruised up after that 3-game stretch and then Conference USA play starts, they'll be fine, especially if Abraham can continue his progress at quarterback. They'll get back to a bowl this year. They could contend in the West, and Jay Hobson continues to do a solid job in Hattiesburg.
As for UAB, boy, it's a wonderful thing to see guys don the cap and the tassel and get a degree, but not when the whole football team graduates at the same time. The only good news for UAB, well, hey, they're playing football again. But it's a pretty favorable schedule.
It is, and they've gotten to bowl games here. The last couple of years they've come back. Bill Clark has done a marvelous job as head coach. Like you said, he had to stick through that when they shut this thing down for a couple of years. They came back, and they didn't skip a beat. They've been pretty good value against the point spread. They were all the way into the Conference USA championship game, which they won against Middle Tennessee last year, avenging a loss the previous week. They do have some replacing to do there, and especially up front on both lines. But Spencer Brown, a big-time running back, over 1,200 yards, is back. The quarterback, Johnston, started to take snaps late last season and was in the pilot's chair for the win over Northern Illinois in the Boca Raton Bowl. And Bill Clark deserves a bigger stage than what he's got here at UAB. So I don't know how long they're going to be able to keep him, but he's a winner, and I would think UAB schedule's not too bad. I mean, they're going to certainly be in the mix again here in the West.
Let's move on to UTEP. One win the last 2 years, but the recruiting has been pretty decent for Dana DeMel. The rub would be so many new faces. How long does that transition last into the season?
Yeah, boy, this was a complete rebuild here that Dimmel took over. Now, he had been, for those with longer memories, I mean, he had been at Wyoming. He actually succeeded Joe Tiller there and was at Houston as well. He got hired away from Wyoming at Houston, then didn't work out quite as well. Been on Bill Snyder's staff for many years at Kansas State before he took this mostly thankless assignment here. The 1-11, yeah, I mean, that doesn't get anybody excited. It was a better 1-11 than the year before. They showed a little bit of progress last year. The offense has been miserable for a couple of years. They're hoping that Kai Loxley, the quarterback, can stay healthy this year. They've got some experience up front on the offensive line. They've got to help themselves out a little bit more in the turnover category. They were minus 17 last year. That was one of the worst in the country. That can't work for a team like UTEP. They're looking to be a little bit more competitive this year. They should exceed one win. I'm not sure they're going to get much more than that, but at least they look a little more competitive than they were towards the end of the preceding regime.
All right, Bruce, you make the case for UTSA. Last year they lost their last 6, and this was a team that couldn't score, and it was a team that couldn't stop anybody. That's not a good combo.
No, it's not. And, this is a situation now with Frank Wilson, head coach. He started off pretty well there, former LSU aide, but it has really flattened out there at the Alamo Dome. And they've just got to find some offense there, or his regime is in danger of running into the ground here. And I'm not sure how long they're going to stick with it. They have some high hopes there for this to become the flagship program of Conference USA, especially playing in that great stadium in that great city like they do. But they need to get some offense going. Last year, I mean, their numbers across the board, they were almost bottom in scoring, barely 14 per game, only 247 yards per game. They simply have to do some things offensively to get some things going there. I'm not sure if Frank Harris, they thought he might be the quarterback last year, injured his knee in spring, didn't make any contributions. He's a lefty. They think he might be able to spark the offense a little bit, but that's simply the deal. They've got to do some things better on offense. They've got a couple games with Baylor and Army there in mid-September that could beat them up before they get in the conference play. But Wilson's job might be on the line here if he doesn't turn this thing around, as they have undershot the last couple of years.
Well, I like North Texas in the West. Louisiana Tech a bit of a sleeper. And then in the East, Bruce, what do you think? 3-horse race, Atlantic, International, and Marshall?
Yeah, I think that's pretty much it, Brian. I'm a little partial to Butch Davis, who did, by the way, lose last year to close on to Marshall and got whipped by Kiffin last year. So it's going to be big for Butch to get revenge in those two. But I'm going to pick Butch to nose out Marshall and Lane Kiffin in third in the East. But that'll be a pretty good race. And like you said, there'll be several of these teams in bowl week coming up in December. And always watch USA teams in the postseason.
Bruce Marshall from the legendary publication The Gold Sheet with outstanding information. I'm Brian Blessing. There you have it, a preview of Conference USA.
Betmaker, let's make some money tonight.
Well, that's the Betmaker Show for now. We publish multiple times each week. We'd like to thank you for listening, and if you liked what you heard, please take a moment to leave a rating and review, or subscribe to our show feed, or share our show with a friend or two and help us grow the show. We very much appreciate it. Visit us on the web at betmaker.com. And reminder to sign up for the newsletter. Thanks to our engineer, Darren Vandermolen, and producer, Mike Gallivan. The Betmaker Show is a production of Cardinal Marketing Incorporated. Betmaker is a registered trademark. Any rebroadcast, reproduction, or other use of this content without the express written consent of Cardinal Marketing Incorporated is strictly prohibited.
The handicapping and sports odds information contained on this podcast is for entertainment purposes only. Please confirm the wagering regulations in your jurisdiction, as they vary from state to state, province to province, and country to country. Using this information to contravene any law or statute is prohibited. The podcast is not associated with, nor is it endorsed by any professional or collegiate league, association, or team. This podcast does not target and is not intended for an audience under the age of 18. If you think that you have a gambling addiction, stop this podcast now and please seek help.
Gambling and betting on sports is a form of entertainment and should be about having a good time. But when done excessively, it may negatively affect other areas of a person's life, such as their physical and mental health, school or work performance, finances, and or interpersonal relationships. At Betmaker.com and the Betmaker Show, we're concerned about the addiction that gambling may cause, and for this reason, we encourage everyone to practice responsible gambling, an approach to gambling that helps you ensure that it remains an enjoyable activity. Here are the main principles of responsible gambling. Don't think of gambling as a way to make money. Always gamble with money that you can afford to lose. Set limits and stick to them. Never chase losses. Don't gamble when you're depressed or upset, and create a healthy balance. Always be aware of how much time you spend gambling or thinking about gambling. And do not allow gambling to cause you to miss out on time with family and friends or time spent on other activities you enjoy. By following these guidelines, gambling can be a good time and great entertainment. If you feel at any time that your gambling is taking away from important areas of your life, is causing you stress or depression, or is leading to financial losses that are beyond your control, please reach out for help. Learn more at responsiblegambling.org.